I've been replaying Another Crab's Treasure recently, not because I never finished it, not because I missed content, because I already beat this game. I played it when it first came out. I loved it, put it down, and I moved on. The normal cycle. But Aggro Crab added New Game Plus, and because the game was on sale, I ended up buying it and jumping back in. Honestly, coming back to this game has reminded me why I loved it so much in the first place. Because the more I replay it, the more I realize that Another Crab's Treasure isn't just one of my favorite Souls-likes. It's one of my favorite examples of something that feels increasingly rare in modern gaming. Restraint. And I know that's a weird word to use when talking about a game where you're playing as a hermit crab beating sea creatures to death with a soda can. But hear me out. The older I get, the more I find myself appreciating games that know exactly what they want to be. Games that aren't trying to become my entire personality. Games that aren't trying to dominate the next 6 months of my life. Games that don't need 200 hours to justify their existence. And Another Crab's Treasure is one of those games. One of the first things I noticed jumping back into New Game Plus is that things felt different. Enemy placements have changed. Some encounters feel remixed. There were multiple moments where I stopped and thought, wait, I don't remember this. Now, maybe it's because it's been so long since I last played. Maybe my memory is just fuzzy. I don't think it's that entirely. It genuinely feels like the developers wanted returning players to approach familiar places differently. And I love that. Because the best Souls-like experiences aren't the ones where you're sprinting through areas you've already mastered. The best Souls-like experiences are the ones where you're moving carefully, checking corners, paying attention, looking for danger, looking for secrets, looking for shortcuts. That's the magic of the genre. Well, at least for me. I've always loved the feeling of slowly picking apart a level, not rushing through it or speed running it, just exploring it. And Another Crab's Treasure does a surprisingly good job of bringing that feeling back. But the more I played it again, the more I've realized that what I really like about the game has very little to do with New Game Plus. It's the pacing. The pacing is incredible, and I don't think we talk enough about pacing when discussing games. We talk about graphics, we talk about combat, we talk about bosses, the performance, the story, but pacing? Pacing is one of the most important things a game can create, because pacing determines whether a game leaves you wanting more, or leaves you exhausted. And man, I think modern gaming has developed a real obsession with size. Every game wants to be bigger, every RPG wants to be longer, every open world wants to have more content, more activities, more collectibles, more systems, more progression, more everything. And somewhere along the way, I think we started confusing quantity with value. We've reached a point where people almost expect a game to consume their life. If a game isn't 100 hours long, somebody inevitably asks whether it's worth the money. And I understand where that mindset comes from. Games are expensive, and people want value. But value and length are not the same thing. I've spent hundreds of hours in games like Elden Ring, and I adore it. It's one of the greatest games ever made. But even as somebody who loves it, I can admit that game is enormous. Absolutely enormous. Sometimes overwhelmingly enormous. And after spending more than 500 hours in something like that, there's a part of me that starts craving the opposite. I start craving games that are focused, games that know when to stop, games that don't feel the need to justify themselves with another 50 hours of content. That's where Another Crab's Treasure shines. It feels complete. Not small, not unfinished, not lacking, complete. That's a very different thing. Every area feels like it exists for a reason. Every boss feels like it arrives at the right moment. Every mechanic gets introduced, explored, and expanded upon without dragging on forever. And because of that, the game never feels bloated. It never feels like it's wasting your time. It never feels like it's desperately trying to convince you that it's worth the price tag. It simply trusts itself. And I think that's why I enjoy it so much. The game reminds me of something I love about Bloodborne. Whenever I talk about Bloodborne, I always end up talking about pacing, because Bloodborne moves. The game understands momentum. It understands escalation. It understands how to keep introducing new ideas without overwhelming you. By the time Bloodborne ends, I always feel satisfied. Not exhausted, satisfied. And that's a difficult balance to achieve. Another Crab's Treasure, it's a very similar feeling for me. It's not trying to be the biggest Souls-like. It's not trying to be the hardest Souls-like, or the one with the most content. It's not trying to redefine the genre. It's just trying to be a really good game. And surprisingly, it feels refreshing nowadays, because we're living in an era where every game wants to be forever. Every game has a roadmap, seasonal content, engagement metrics. They want you logging in every day. Every game wants to become the only thing you play. Another Crab's Treasure doesn't feel interested in any of that. It feels like a game that simply wants to give you a great adventure and let you move on. I miss that. Some modern games feel like marathons. You finish them and think, finally. Not because they're bad, because they were long. Too long. Another Crab's Treasure reminds me of an era where games understood that less can be more, where the goal wasn't to maximize playtime, the goal was to maximize enjoyment. And I think that's why replaying it has been such a pleasant surprise, because in a year where I've spent hundreds of hours wandering through massive worlds, checking off giant maps, and working through endless content, this goofy little crab game has reminded me of something important. A game doesn't need to be massive to be memorable. It doesn't need 1,000 activities or a decade-long roadmap. Sometimes all it needs is great pacing, great combat, great level design, and enough confidence to know when the adventure should end. That's why Another Crab's Treasure has grown on me even more during the second playthrough. The first time I played it, I thought it was a fantastic Souls-like. The second time, I think I've come to appreciate what it's actually doing. It's a reminder that bigger isn't always better. Sometimes better is just better. And in an industry obsessed with making everything larger, longer, and more expensive, that lesson feels more valuable than ever.